right, welcome everybody. This is the latest episode of Virtue's sort of casual conversation series, Hash It Out, where we discuss industry topics and just have sort of casual conversations about them to see, what we're thinking with thought leaders in that space. So, my name is Trevor Foskett, Senior Director of Solutions Engineering here at Virtue. If you've been watching Hash It Out, you've probably seen my face a couple of times. I'm joined today by my friend Zach Walker, who's the founder and managing partner of ATX Defense. And our session today is titled "In Defense of Your Data: Navigating CMMC Compliance in Google Workspace." So, Zach, thanks for joining us. You want to give a couple words on yourself and ATX Defense?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Trevor and Virtue. I'm very excited to be here today. So ATX Defense is a management consultancy. Primarily, what we do is work with Department of Defense, mainly here in Austin, Texas, and help them with various technology initiatives that they have, generally around software development, things like that, which is very different than CMMC. That's something that we came into a couple of years ago because we were working with the Department of Defense and offering them Google Workspace as a Google partner. And then again, working through all of the fun compliance issues and questions and everything to get them a CUI capable workspace. And then at some point it hit us, probably too late, that this is something that the DoD needs. It's probably something that industry needs. And I was just astonished when I was started to look and do the research online. Google Workspace, CMMC, there's nothing there. I mean, the only thing you find is all the FUD that's out there by the Microsoft resellers about how you can't use Google Workspace for
Sure.
CMMC. And then I started hearing these stories of dual use startups and other high growth companies, which are almost all on Google Workspace, being told that they have to move to Microsoft GCC High to do any work with the government. And I was just really blown away that there wasn't a voice out there kind of countering that or giving some information. Because every time a startup leaves Workspace to go to GCC High, an angel loses its wings. And so what we're doing here is trying to stop that from happening and just make sure people have the information they need. We're a very non-traditional reseller. We're a consultancy. CMMC is a very important topic for us, just being mission driven. Myself, I've been a reservist for 22 years and worked at the intersection of commercial tech and national security and intelligence for a long time. And so there's a lot of reasons why DoD wants CMMC to happen. There's a lot of reasons why NIST 800-171 is the law of the land, and happy to jump into those as well.
Yeah.
And it's just a very important thing.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate that. And you mentioned a couple things in there that I think really resonated, especially in this world of CMMC. And CMMC has been looming over a lot of these contractors for a couple of years now. You mentioned FUD, which for those who aren't aware, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, as well as just getting people the information they need. I think there's a lot of FUD out there, and maybe not a lot of the information that people need when it comes to CMMC, leading a lot of people to maybe make overcompensations in what their plans are for that, or simply not understanding what's required of them. And to that end, you recently published a quite lengthy blog post about your findings, kind of looking into what does CMMC actually require, and does this is this something that can be achieved on Google Workspace? I think if you'd ask most IT folks in the DoD adjacent space, they would say you really need to be on Microsoft platforms in order to meet these requirements. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what inspired you to write that piece, and a little bit about what your findings were, and if you were surprised or not by kind of the result?
Yeah. No, I just kept having to email people these answers, and I just thought, okay, maybe I should just sit down and type this all out so I don't have to keep emailing it back and forth. The way this started for me is over the summer. Um, Honestly, I'll be honest. My family went out of town for a bit of time, so I could actually finally sit down and concentrate. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to write a guide on level 1 of CMMC, which is just if you're dealing with federal contract information, non-public information, that's generally accepted as level 1 of CMMC. How would you do that in Workspace? Can you do that in Workspace? What else might you need? And just get that out there. And that's something that we made, cmmcguide.atxdefense.com, put that out over the summer. And it was really popular. And that was really, for the first time, people were saying, wow, I never had any idea that you could do this in Workspace. And to be fair, it is a little bit more complicated than just buying a single license like you do with Microsoft, but it certainly can be done, and it can be done at a much lower cost for Microsoft. So again, with that, sending out the guide, answering questions, getting lots of questions about data sovereignty and ITAR support and foreign nationals and just all the things that you reasonably would want to know if you're adopting it for your business to meet, both CMMC and other, DFARS, the 7012 requirements. So I just collated that data and thought I'll put it out there. There's a really, I'd say, really good group of people that are in the CMMC space, which I guess I'm not one of them, just by guilty by
Whether you want to be
association.
or not, you're in it
Yeah,
now.
yeah, I'm in it now. But it's a really supportive, it's a really good group of people. Again, it is almost exclusively Microsoft, but not because they don't want to do anything else. It's just historically been what this environment has done, because it mirrors the DoD, and until recently, the DoD has been very much a Microsoft monopoly. So it's a great group. So anything I post, I generally put it out to them first and let them hack at it and ask questions. And some of the more controversial things that I was saying, which I felt like, certainly stepping out of my comfort zone, talking about, FIPS 140-2 encryption and Department of State rules and regulations and ITAR and all that. Just putting it out there, my understanding of what I could tell in the context of Google Workspace. And as far as I can tell, that either everyone thinks it's wrong and they're just not saying anything because they think it's really funny, or it's actually correct and you really can do what you need to do in Workspace for anywhere from 30 to 90% less cost than on Microsoft GCC High.
Wow, yeah. So if you're someone who's, thinking about CMMC compliance, you deal with CUI, but you want to be in the Google ecosystem, what are some of the top things I want to think about as I evaluate that ecosystem? Because you mentioned, I think one of the advantages that Microsoft has in this space is they say, look, you buy the license and you're good. Google, and you're finding not quite like that, but there are options. So are there a few kind of key things that you would have people look at when they're evaluating that ecosystem? You need to do this, and this in order to check those boxes, or is it more org by org, sort of up to company preference? What were your findings like on that front?
Yeah. I think what it really comes down to is it's a very different approach, but you really have to decide what kind of information either you're bound to be held by contract, or the kind of information you think you'll need to store securely within a workspace. It's not really the same on the Microsoft side. And I thought this was really interesting because both the resellers and Microsoft itself, and I quote them in the CMMC guide, what they say is it really doesn't matter what kind of data you store. You really need to get GCC High, which, as far as I can tell, is about $1,150 a user a year. I don't know because they don't post this information publicly, which I think is also kind of a red flag. But well over $1,000 a year. And the reason you need to do that is, I think their words is, you don't want to deal with the pain of having to migrate every time you go from commercial to GCC and now migrate from GCC to GCC High. And it just sounds like a really horrible, expensive process. Google, their technology is not legacy, right? It's very modern technology. That's just not how Google works. There's no migration if you need to change editions of Google. And also, all editions of Google, for the most part, you can do those things that you can't do in Microsoft, like guarantee your data stays in the United States. That's a very expensive premium feature of Microsoft. You get that just by getting Google Workspace because of the way it's architected. And especially when it comes to some of the more niche data residency things, the data sovereignty issues, that's just an add-on. And seamlessly in the back end, it fixes the issue with Google, whereas in Microsoft, that would be a whole migration. So, and that's why I think that was one of the more contentious points in what I wrote, is essentially what Microsoft's saying is, no matter what your use case is, you really need to pay $1,150 a user a year. What I'm saying is, if you don't have ITAR export control data, limited dissemination data with no foreign, like HX Defense, we're essentially a DoD contractor doing management consulting. We only deal with CUI basic, right? And CUI basic meaning, by definition, doesn't have special handling controls, doesn't have special safeguarding controls. That's all we need. And for CUI basic, you really only need, by my estimate, the lowest version of Google Workspace, which is roughly $20 a month. So if you go to Microsoft, they would say pay $1,150 a year. If you go to Google, again, for a simple normal use case, pay $240 a year. You'll need to get a little bit like antivirus, things like that. But if you can't find antivirus for less than like $900 a year, then you're doing it wrong.
Maybe you need a different MSP to work with to figure out where you should be buying your
Yeah, you
antivirus.
might need a different service provider if you're paying that
Yeah,
much
that's
on
right.
antivirus.
Well, you mentioned something that's interesting. You mentioned we've talked a lot about CMMC, and you said, sort of in the same breath, ITAR, which a lot of times go hand in hand. We work with a lot of organizations who need CMMC and ITAR, but they're not the same. And there are some organizations who only need one and only need the other. And I think there's a very important distinction to be made because the requirements are similar, but not quite exactly the same. ITAR has some requirements for, encryption and hosting of keys to be outside that same environment, whereas CMMC just says we need to have encryption. CMMC
Right.
says you need to use specifically FIPS 140-2 validated encryption modules. ITAR says that or equivalent. So it sounds like you guys are working mostly with CMMC, but do you see any areas of overlap there that would require someone to maybe change their plans, or is it largely you want to just focus just on CMMC for workspace, or are there sort of ITAR solutions there as well?
For us as a as a company, we really want to focus on that defense industrial base. And honestly, stepping back a bit, for us, I mentioned earlier, it's really kind of a mission-driven thing for us, having backgrounds in defense and national security. But I think more specifically, to put a finer point on it, before I started HX Defense, as a reservist, I was on active duty for about 4 years with the Defense Innovation Unit, which is an organization that it's actually, they've done some really cool stuff. They're now back reporting to the Secretary of Defense. Their big thing was, let's get all these non-traditional companies, all of these dual use startups, think about Elon Musk companies and other really high growth venture backed companies that don't traditionally work with DoD because it can be so slow and painful. Let's find ways to get them in the DoD. Let's get them in. Let's make it easy. And DIU did that to phenomenal success, right? My first deal, we were able to get a $5 million contract awarded in 26 business days, which that's amazing, right? They've done amazing work bringing these companies in. Now we're saying, thanks for playing, but here's NIST 800-171. And I hope you're ready to spend God knows how much on getting your systems up to date with NIST 800-171. And I think for a lot of these companies that maybe only do a small percent of their work in DoD, they're going to say, no, we're good. Yeah, thanks for the good contract vehicles, but I don't think it's worth it for us to go down that path because that's going to hamper us as we grow and do the things in the company. And that's the part that's I think is hard for DoD to realize. I know they put out public statements that they expect consolidation in the industry, which is just a really mean way of saying like companies are going to go out of business, get bought and sold. And I think there's just a bigger issue there, more national security concerns with that.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. And I had this thought the last time we spoke about this, but didn't. We moved on to something else. I didn't get out, but I'm curious. Do you think there's there's obviously an awareness of the effect that this will have sort of on the marketplace as far as these smaller contractors? Do you think there's any intentional thinning of the herd here? And we're getting a little bit beyond the technology here, so feel free to take a pass on this one. This is just more shooting the shit a little bit. But what do you think there? Do you think it's intentional? Let's kind of like get some of these smaller ones out of the way so we only deal with a smaller consolidated base, or is it just an unfortunate side effect of the requirements for handling this type of data?
I like that, like some kind of grand like conspiracy theory of a way to
I'm always going to go there.
Base. Yeah, I like that. What I like to say about conspiracy theories is I've yet to meet a government program manager that's a conspiracy theorist, because once you actually know how things work on the inside, like there's no way anyone could pull off anything of that scale, right? Pick your thing.
Yeah.
And I would say the same here, right? No way do I think the Department of Defense wants to limit competition, wants to cut out small businesses. I really don't. They're doing it for the right reasons. And certainly coming from the highest levels, the things that, especially the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. Kat Hicks, is saying, no, there is no senior executive or general officer would say that they don't want smaller businesses in this space. And if they did, I think it would end very badly for them. It's really not the intention. But what they are saying is, hey, they're not saying this, I'm saying this, but on their behalf, like, the recent Chinese fighter plane looks a whole lot like a U.S. Air Force fighter plane, and it's probably not because they really love the U.S. Air Force. Although I can't blame them. I love the U.S. Air Force too. Probably because it was super easy to take all those documents off of someone's unpatched Windows XP desktop. and just kind of pilfer it off there because someone made a widget that goes in a thing that goes in a thing that goes in a thing that goes on F-35, but they needed the plans or schemes, schematics to get that thing made, and it was just so easy to take. So, and that's the part that I'm kind of torn, because from my defense innovation unit working with venture capital, MBA perspective, like this is a terrible thing to do to companies. The DoD should make it easier. We're going to squeeze out these dual use startups and small businesses. But then from putting my decade at the NSA hat on, well, we need this though. I mean, there's a reason why this exists. There is not an easy way to make it to where our data can be more secure. This has been around since 2017, and that's the part that I certainly didn't realize when I first got in this business, is that the actual requirement to protect CUI, which is this very, very famous DFARS 252.254-7012, which I know far more about than I ever hoped. That's been in effect since 2017. So CMMC is not new, and I get that a lot, right? CMMC is not out. It's not a final rule. We're not going to worry about it. Like if you have CUI, if you're bound by that clause, you've had this requirement since 2017, and so there's really no excuse in it, and it doesn't really matter what size you are. So again, ATX Defense could be a 5 or 6 person company. It could be Raytheon, Northrop Grumman. I mean, it's all the same. It's all the same requirement to protect that, and there's a very good reason, again, because we know for a fact that this information is being taken. We know it's being compromised. We know it's just countless hours and billions of dollars of R&D that's being taken that puts national security at risk. And so it was a very long answer to a very simple question, but I think that the DoD has a very good reason for wanting to do this, and I think that it's not intentional. But we just have to be realistic. Like this is going to dramatically hurt companies, especially when they start seeing the bill from Microsoft for again over $1,000 user a year.
Well, that's I think you're absolutely right. While I always think it would be the world would be a very interesting place if all these conspiracy theories were true. To your point, no one's got time for that, and it is just a side effect, which makes the importance of what you guys at ATX are doing that much more important. Finding affordable solutions for people to meet these compliances. Because if you're paying that 1,100 something per user per year, some just aren't going to be able to do it. So can we find an alternative on a Google Workspace or on a Microsoft commercial cloud rather than a government cloud? To make that work, I think is really important. A lot of our customers come to us for just that. Hey, it sounds like we're going to have to move to GCC High. That's going to quadruple our budget. Is there anything that Virtru can do to kind of help us either move to Google, where we frankly prefer to be, or just stay on the commercial cloud, and using sort of our encryption technologies can help you do that, sort of in the same way that you looked not just at what Microsoft is saying you need to do, but looking what actually the letter of the law says and saying what other technologies can we use to meet these requirements. Maybe not in that one fell swoop of boom, I've just bought a GCC license, but if I add on Google Assured Controls, and then I'm using client-side encryption or Virtru for sending encrypted Gmail. Things like these can get you there, and that total package cost is going to be, I think, wildly more affordable. Even if you add on some extra bells and whistles that you don't totally need, you're still going to have a better experience in that workspace world. So that's so interesting that you're at DIU and hearing about that sort of investment. Is that sort of doing your experience in it? Investigating new technologies, is that sort of how you became more of a Google guy? I mean, coming from your government background, it seems like you should probably be a Microsoft guy. Are you just thinking Google's more forward leaning, or how did you wind up as being sort of a Google evangelist?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't a Google evangelist in the government because I didn't have a chance to. I just knew I hated having to spend 30 minutes trying to log into my government email, and it just randomly not working and crashing. And I thought it was just hopeless. Like I should probably start learning Mandarin now, because when China comes, like no one's going to be able to access their email and it's all over. But then when we got to DIU, DIUX at the time, again, just in one of the barrier breaking things that they did is they essentially gave themselves a waiver to use Google Workspace back 2016, before it was cool and way before it was compliant. But that's a different story. And it was just
maybe we'll edit that part out.
Yeah, I know that part. But and it just was hard to explain how transformative it was. In all seriousness, as much as I hate using the Microsoft email, right? Just the way it was architected, just the way you had to go through just the onerous layers of security, an ID card or a government device, and just all the things that were more security theater that were implemented, then to be able to use Google and to be able to just send messages to people and not have to worry about it and just
Yeah.
easily implement chat and share files without having to go through God knows, like getting a a 20-hour course in SharePoint. It was just so easy and intuitive, and I was able to be far more productive in my job. Again, outreach to companies, outreach to other organizations, doing these projects, doing specifically cyber projects. I was just a different person in what I was able to get done, and that made me realize that there is hope, really, for the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
If more people could use Google, I think we'd be in a much better spot. And still, I'm in the reservist. I'm in the reserves. I go to I go to my Air Force drill every weekend, 1 weekend a month, and it's just like, and this is at 2023, December 2023. Every time it's like, well, there's a new update to the Windows laptop, so you guys are going to need to plug it in and let it go for 4 hours, or like,
Yeah.
oh, the network's down again, so you guys hopefully you didn't need. It's
Yeah.
just astonishing what we deal with.
So yeah, so on that front, I mean, we've been talking a lot about, let's think of Microsoft as sort of the default secure solution we should be looking at. But if the cost or maybe some of the user experience isn't what you're looking for, let's look at alternatives. But I think based on some of the recent news and just this year alone, maybe the industry should be rethinking that position that Microsoft is sort of the default secure. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things you've seen coming out of that world, not just on a cost basis, but sort of security impact as far as the way that they've positioned some of their products and an ecosystem?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and I think it's an important conversation to have in this context, because Google wasn't in the news over the summer for having the Commerce Secretary's email exfiltrated to China, right? There's a reason for that. And in case you didn't know, that was Microsoft, right? Their information was taken. Google went through this, and that's the part that I think is very interesting. Google dealt with their own Chinese hack, Operation Aurora, back in 2009, 2010. Like, they went through this all, and it was terrible. I mean, source code taking, you name it, it's all on the Wikipedia page. And what came out of that was, my understanding is, Google basically said, okay, blank check. If we could try again and rebuild an architecture that was secure from the beginning and was managed in a way that let's say China or another actor compromised part of it wouldn't take down the whole system, how do we do that? And that's exactly what they did. And that is zero trust. I know zero trust is a buzzword, but that's where it got its start, was the fallout, the changes coming out of Operation Aurora. Microsoft, I think, was just busy printing money, selling their existing software to the government, and was busy like, money printer go burr. Okay, I guess we'll keep doing what we're doing. Oh, there's another 0 day. Oh, there's another hack. Oh, sorry guys, we won't
Yeah.
let that happen again until it happens the next week. And just, they never did that, right? It's legacy
Right.
desktop servers and legacy technology that's now in the cloud. And I think we're seeing kind of that I guess that technical debt of when you do that refactoring, there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are latent. So we're seeing that in the news with Air. I'm saying Google's perfect, certainly, but what I am saying is, when you rebuild an architecture from the ground up for security, and things like GovCloud, right? Don't need a GovCloud in Google, right? Because the infrastructure,
Right.
all their infrastructure is FedRAMP high and certified.
Right.
It's just a very different way of looking at it. And once you realize there are alternatives, it gets pretty exciting for DoD and DoD adjacent organizations like CNMC.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we are at time, Zach, but that was wildly informative for me. I hope for those listening in as well. If you liked hearing from Zach and maybe me a little bit today as well, you can join us again in about a month, towards the end of January. We're going to have Zach on a more sort of formal webinar style presentation that we're calling CUI in Context, clarifying CMMC and ITAR confusion for defense contractors. So we're looking forward to chatting with you again in about a month, Zach. Any final notes? I know you've got a plane to catch. Maybe tell us where you're off to and why, if you don't have any final notes on CMMC and Google Workspace. Hopefully we're not making you too late, but really appreciate the time.
No, we're still good. I'm glad we're able to do this today, because I am about to head to the airport to go to Las Vegas for my 40th birthday. And as you know, the old saying goes, what happens in Vegas can stay in Vegas if it's FIPS 140-2 encrypted.
There you go. Couldn't have said it better myself. Zach, thank you so much for the time, and look forward to speaking with you next month. Hope you have a good weekend, and make it back in one piece for us. All right.
We'll try. Thanks so much, Trevor. Bye.
Thank you, sir.